Analyzing the broad business environment seems like an elaborate exercise. Having said that, it is an important exercise that you must carry out to get more clarity for your venture idea. But what after analyzing the business environment? Probably one has to get into understanding of the industry in specific. Let's hear our subject matter experts explain how to analyze the industry for your own venture.
After analyzing the business environment, it's important for an entrepreneur to analyze the industry he or she intends to enter. Industry analysis involves reviewing the economic, political, and market factors that influence the way the specific industry functions and develops. Industry analysis enables a business to develop a competitive strategy that best defends against the competitive forces or influences them in its favor. For doing a complete industry analysis, first identify your industry very clearly. In the late 1970s, Michael Porter created a framework which is relevant even to this day. According to him, industry attractiveness is determined by 5 forces in that industry, and these forces typically interact with each other. The 5 forces are threat of entry, buyer power, supplier power, threat of substitutes, and competitive rivalry. The more forces that are favorable to the entrepreneur, the more attractive that industry is. Now, let's take a look at them one by one. New entrants to an industry bring new capacity and a desire to gain market share that puts pressure on prices, costs, and the rate of investment necessary to compete. Think about the realty sector. A few years ago, there were just 2 major players, 99 Acres and Magic Bricks, catering to online aggregation of properties being rented or leased or sold. But suddenly, so many other players have entered the foray, such as housing.com, nobroker.in, and many others. The threat of entry of new entrants puts a cap on the profit potential of an industry, as more and more players come in to take a slice of the pie. Having said that, expecting no competition to enter the domain is also unrealistic. But knowing your competitive scenario at the time of your entry into the market is critical. The threat of entry in an industry depends on the height of entry barriers that are present and on the reaction entrants can expect from the existing incumbents. Like, if the online realty players have a great network offline, then it's a barrier that the others cannot easily replicate or match. Let's take another example of Amazon. There's always a threat of new entrants, marketplaces, as it's relatively less costly to enter the market and set up operations. There's no additional cost incurred to set up any physical stores and locations. In addition, traditional established physical stores can easily move into online retailing and bring with them their substantial consumer base. On the other hand, Amazon has created entry barriers through things like variety of products offerings, first mover advantage, substantial economy of scale, and so on. While assessing for your own venture, the question you need to ask is whether it is easy or difficult to enter this industry. If you are planning to build an enduring venture, then it's better to have a high barrier to entry to begin with. The next force in this 5 forces model is the buyer power. Powerful customers can capture more value by forcing down prices, demanding better quality or more service, thereby driving up costs and generally playing sellers off against one another. Let's take an example of the power industry. Most of the coal which is produced in India is purchased by the thermal power industry. Thermal power plants are the major buyers of coal. So, in India, due to a limited number of large thermal power plants, they are very powerful buyers, and if the domestic mining companies increase the price of coal to a high level, power plants will import coal from outside. Take another example of Walmart. Walmart is extremely powerful as a buyer. It has enormous reach and reaches thousands of end users. It also buys in large quantities and controls how a customer accesses the brands and products that it stocks. That means Walmart can dictate prices, delivery times, and product quality from its suppliers. Suppliers cater to this pressure by basing their operations close to Walmart's headquarters and allowing easy access to the company's purchasing departments to test products and negotiate terms. Walmart can easily switch suppliers, which gives the company additional power to dictate terms. Here, the buyers would have high buying power as the number of buyers are low. The product is anyway standardized, providing low switching costs, so making the seller even more powerless. Large volume buyers are particularly powerful in industries with high fixed costs, such as telecommunications equipment, offshore drilling, and bulk chemicals. The question you have to ask is, do your buyers have the power to set terms and conditions? For an entrepreneur, it's better to have weak buyer power. The next force for industry evaluation is the supplier's power. Just think, how many cell phone service providing companies are there in India? 4, maybe 5? Powerful suppliers like telecommunication majors often create a situation where they get most of the value by charging higher prices, limiting quality or services, or shifting costs to the buyers. Looking at another industry, apply the same thought. Microsoft, for instance, has contributed to the erosion of profitability among personal computer makers by raising prices on their Microsoft software. So the question you have to ask is, will you or your suppliers have the power to set terms and conditions? Of course, for a startup, it would be ideal to have low supplier power. Threat of substitutes, which is the next force, is something that also needs to be analyzed within the industry. A substitute performs the same or a similar function as an industry's product by a different means. Substitutes are usually always present, but they're easy to overlook because they may appear to be very different from the industry's product. Let's take the example of travel agents, whether online or offline. They were threatened when airlines themselves became the substitute of travel agents. Let's take the case of the automobile industry. Just 2 to 3 years ago, if you were to ask any automobile sector expert the list of potential substitutes, the list would have been very different. Today, with the advent of several aggregated taxi or cab services such as Uber, Ola, etc., the younger generation, especially the first-time car purchasers, are often foregoing the decision of buying a car. They're doing that on the basis of easy availability of a car and a driver without having the headache of petrol filling, cleaning the car, or any other maintenance. So the question here should be, is it easy or difficult for your product to be substituted? As an entrepreneur, your product should preferably have less threat of substitute.
I personally don't own a car. I don't feel the need to own a car anymore. I'm seeing around me many people not buying their first cars also. My employees, other people who would have bought a first car by now. And actually stepping back at a macro level, if you see India has only 5% car ownership, and our public road infrastructure is already overcrowded and overwhelmed, completely overwhelmed. Unlike the West, where there's 70% car ownership and the infrastructure is much better. So India cannot have a paradigm of mobility where everybody owns a car. It's just not going to happen. And the paradigm for mobility is going to be a shared service like Ola. And I see that around me everywhere. People are not using their cars. If they own a car, they're not buying the second cars. Many people like me are not even buying their first cars. So I think it's going to change much faster than most people expected it to.
Define your industry narrowly because it will clearly give you focus as to who your principal competitors are, which in turn will help you in assessing the competitive rivalry. Take the example of social networking sites. Facebook commands a loyal user base across several demographics and geographies. However, competition from Google and Twitter can cause a reduction in the average time spent by active users on the Facebook platform, as these platforms offer unique sets of features. Further, a number of social networks are cropping up that target a niche user base. For example, think about Snapchat, which appeals to a younger audience and is more popular among females. We expect this trend to persist, and hence Facebook could see competition intensifying within different user demographics. In the traditional slow growth industries, like the pharmaceutical sector, competitive rivalry will be really high. Needless to say, in such a sector, heavy brand spends are needed to become the market leaders. While talking about competitive rivalry, one thought: don't overlook relevant substitutes. For example, even bullet trains could be a competitor to the airline industry. Here, the question you need to ask yourself is your competitor rivalry intense? As an entrepreneur, you would prefer less competition, of course.
Uber had actually been in India for 2 years, and when Uber came into India, we were very small. I remember we had less than $500,000 in the bank when Uber entered India, and we were doing like 2,000 rides a day, which is nothing. So Uber and Ola have evolved actually fairly in parallel in India. We've done a much better job of building a much more local product. And if you look at how a local company can retain its market lead and grow its market share, it's about being more local. Fundamentally, it's about being more local on everything. On the product that you're building, different geographies and different cultures require different features. On the brand that you're building, in our case, on both the driver and the consumer end, and on the partnerships and the integration with the ecosystem. Because you're local, you can do these things much faster.
Now, based on all the 5 forces, you have to assess your industry and find just how attractive or unattractive it is. Remember, the better your score in the 5 forces, the better chance your venture has to succeed. Now, let's apply our learning to understand the Porter's 5 forces model for eBay. eBay is one of the leading players in the worldwide e-commerce marketplace. If you look at the online market space, competitive rivalry within the industry, bargaining power of customers, and the threat of new entrants are the 3 key forces that can pose a threat to eBay's business. eBay faces huge competition which restricts pricing increases on its marketplace. Due to relatively low barriers to entry, new companies continue to crop up in the global e-commerce market, further intensifying the competition. Now, let's look at the competitive rivalry within the industry. eBay faces competition in its marketplaces segment both from offline and online players. Customers can buy products from a wide range of retailers, distributors, auctioneers, directories, search engines, and so on, and hence the competition is intense. Now, if you look at the bargaining power of customers, the huge competition in the e-commerce market allows the customers to win, as companies have to keep their prices in check to attract buyers. Customers can choose from a wide range of offline as well as online players. A large number of companies have entered the e-commerce space with relatively niche product offerings. So, customers can always buy from some or the other website, and in case they are not satisfied with one player. Now comes the other element, which is threat of new entrants. The e-commerce market is characterized by low barriers to entry. It's relatively easy for newer players to enter the market and start selling products. Having said that, it's difficult for newer players to gain brand recognition and attain high ranking on search engines. Newer players require significant marketing budgets to compete on a large scale, and this restricts the entry of newer players to an extent. Talking about bargaining power of suppliers, in case of eBay, millions of sellers list their products on eBay marketplaces. Hence, their individual bargaining power is limited. However, sellers can also list the products on multiple platforms and sites, including Amazon, Flipkart, Snapdeal, and various international e-commerce sites. So if eBay introduces policy and price changes that are unsatisfactory to sellers, then it could result in lower number of product listings on its marketplace. Threat of substitute products, which is the last force in the model, is pretty low because of the large product range on its platform, and hence there is no real threat from this. Further, the product range continues to expand, and eBay can easily introduce several different types of products to adapt to changing customer trends.